Hello and welcome back to Genesis Designs and Modelcraft, and welcome back to even more modelling for beginners. And I think this is probably episode 7, but please forgive me if I'm wrong. So last time then I left you with the model itself. Here it's all painted and all of the markings are on, and it is at this moment still exactly as you saw it last. Quick reminder, looking quite dapper, if I do say so myself. But this episode we're going to put the model aside and completely ignore it. I want it to spend as much time as possible getting nice and dry so that there is the minimum possible danger of anything going wrong with subsequent weathering layers, varnishes, etc. So what we're going to do instead is take a detailed tour through the instruction booklet and the remaining parts frames and separate off every single piece that still remains to be prepped, painted, deckled, photo etched, you name it. I want every last piece that's remaining for this model to be off the frames and ready for work, and here they all are, as if by magic. So just quick dive through what we have. Spin it over here and the fairing for the back of the main cockpit glazing. Here we have undercarriage parts, the aerials. This is all turret parts, quite a few, and I've already actually done a little bit of work there. Then the remainder of the photo etch fret over here, the turned brass pitot and machine gun barrels. Then we've got our Barracuda cast resin main wheels here, tail wheel assembly, and these are the little shoe brushes that fit over the tyres. And then in here are parts that were previously have been removed and worked on. So there's the 3D printed Hurricane exhausts, the kit tail wheel, propeller spinner parts. These are some photo etched mirrors that Andy Long kindly sent over. The main turret glazing, again I'm not interested in having this opened up. Even though Airfix supply a lot of detail that will be impossible to see, I still don't want the turret opened up. The silver painted propeller and our thinned down and slightly refined main undercarriage doors. That's all the parts that are left to fit to the rest of the model to make it a complete model. So it's quite a few, but it also isn't very many. Please, if you as a modeller are not comfortable with removing all of these parts, if you fear that you might misidentify or find it all a bit too difficult, don't do it all at once, do it in stages. I would recommend, if that's the case, that you probably attack the turret, get all that sorted out, then do your undercarriage parts and what have you. Do it in a sequence and level of difficulty that suits you. I'm completely happy with this. So yeah, this is all the parts. So what I'm going to do now is each and every one of these parts I will clean off the sprue stubs and clean off all of the mould seam lines. I do this to everything, no matter if it's a part that will never be seen again. I think sensible people might question or query that approach, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to do, I think. Why bother cleaning seam lines or sprue nubs or anything else off parts that will never be seen? I do it out of habit, frankly. I do it because sometimes you think something's not going to be seen and then it turns out it can be, and you've left yourself with a less than excellent final product. Part of why I do it is because I enjoy doing it, bizarre as that may seem. I find it, I think therapeutic is too strong a word, but I do enjoy sitting and sort of gently whittling away at the parts and making them as nice as I can. And it is just good practice, honestly, not in terms of it being a good practice because you should do it, but it's good practice to clean up the parts and make them really, really good. But of course, again, your models, your choice. If you think it's a waste of time cleaning up parts that will never be seen again, then don't clean them up, just use them as they are. But that's what I'm going to do first. I'll clean all these parts and make them usable, and if there are any points to raise, which there are going to be actually, I'll come back to them in greater detail once I've done the initial clean-up. Right. Well, I thought I'd show you something astonishingly tedious with the clean-up of the undercarriage legs specifically. I talk a lot and often about cleaning up mould seams, and I've already spoken about it in this video, and here I go again. And it occurred to me whilst I was doing this, unfortunately the second leg, I've never actually showed how I go about doing it, and it's yet another thing that I just assume everyone understands, and they don't necessarily, so I'm just going to quickly show you what I mean. So if I bring this up a bit closer to the camera, do you see? Please stay in focus, thank you. Here, this is what I'm talking about, and it continues up there. The centre of every single part will have one of these mould seams, and all it is where the two halves of the big tool join together. It's just a little bit, it's the mark it leaves, and it will leave a mark, and every single kit, every single part of every single kit will have a mould seam on it somewhere. Some are better than others, and these aren't too bad as air fixes go, frankly. There's no sort of ovalisation, there's no misalignment, it's literally just this visible mark where the tool is. So all I do is I use the straight blade, and I'm holding it over at an angle. It's not perpendicular to the part, it's more like something like that. And as I scrape along, I also move forward. So I'm not going scrape, that was my little impression of the sound it makes. I've got it leant over a little bit, and I'm also sweeping across. And this way reduces or completely removes the tendency of the blade to chatter and leave the little scores in the part, and it also allows you to even out the surface a little bit. And that is it. That's how I remove these, and it can be just as quick and easy as that. Here there's a little bit of wear, that's why you've got this lump just on the top of the actual fork. There's a little lump, and I need to be a little bit more aggressive here, so I'll actually trim. Just carefully. And the thing with this kind of approach is less is more, not more is less, less is more. Just nibble at it, don't try and do it in one go. That's that, and then I'll just essentially deburr this edge down here, and that's that sorted without any need for any other work. And again here, it's a combination of scraping and just really gently carving, paring, whichever, at the parts to remove the seams. This retraction or steady is a little bit, it seems a bit more obvious here, but again it's the same approach. I've got it tilted over, and I'll bring it sideways across the part as well as scraping along, and you can see that seam has become the spoil there. Let's work away along it, and actually as the seam disappears, so will that piece of excess plastic, and that's it done. At the end here there's a misalignment. I'm going to chop that bodily straight off, thus square it up, same on the top, because that's the kind of thing that has the potential to impede the fit of your parts. And when I've finished with all of that, I will tend to get a sanding sponge like this, and I'll go across the part it doesn't really fit. I need the single-sided sponge for this. I'll just make one. There, now I've got a single-sided sponge. Get in there and you let the sponge do its thing. As I've said many times before, it can conform to the part, and it will just remove any kind of squaring off that you've managed to achieve with your scalpeling. And the last bit, and one that I suspect you won't have seen before, is I'll get the scriber out. Now, it's inevitable, pretty much, that doing these operations, these kind of step details, which are very common in undercarriage legs, can get a little bit softened. And what I do to combat that is I'll get the scribing blade and I'll put it into that detail, and I just roll the part around. I tend to try to move the part rather than the scriber, and I'm not scribing it, I'm simply pressing it. Don't try and scribe it, that is a frustrating road to nowhere. Just a little bit of pressure, and what this will do is just very slightly crispen up any softening of those edges. And the final touch, as you might expect, is your extra thin start cement, and you just paint it in the areas you've been working, like so, and it just neatens things up, and that's it done. And this will take, you know, probably 10-15 minutes to do the whole leg, I don't know, from start to finish. But of course there is another problem with this leg. You can see there my finished item. You see that huge sink mark? Same on this side. You could just give it a jolly good ignoring, of course, and obviously I haven't quite finished there, but I have filled it. This is the other leg, this is finished. You may just be able to see a bit of whiteness there, and that is super glue and talc, which was applied. There was a little unevenness up here, and it was applied round in the sink mark, top and bottom, and I mixed it with more talc than usual. So again, I often talk about how more talc equals a stiffer, you know, a stiffer mixture. You make a thicker super gloop. This makes it easier to fill the defect, and it also makes it easier to sand. The more talc you've got in this mixture, the easier it is to sand, but it will go off quicker. This may or may not be a problem. So I've got some here, just mixed it and apply it. I just wipe it off the cocktail stick on this angle, and then just do that, and that's it filled. Same on the other side, try not to stick my finger in the stuff that I've just put on. I see a lot of people when they're applying filler, and this goes for full-size jobs as well as modelling, trying to get the perfect finish in their filler with the applicator. I really don't see the point of that. You're just faffing about, you know, pasting your filler up and down, trying to get the perfect finish. The perfect finish is going to be achieved with your finishing media. I mean, for sure, don't slap so much in that it's going to take you 3 days to sand it off. But all this fannying around, I beat myself out there, faffing around. Trying to get the perfect finish in the filler is absolutely pointless and a waste of time. Just apply it neatly. There's enough in there to do the job, but not so much so that it's going to have a huge penalty in sanding time. So get myself a micro brush. Use some accelerator. Okay, and when this super glue and talc is dry, get the scalpel And I'm going to do the same old thing. I'm going to carve a little bit at a time, again, nibble at it. Shave this filler media down little by little. By being patient with the approach to this, you minimise the risk of damaging the part due to the fact that you're applying too much pressure. And that's what you need to avoid. This is not a robust part. So whilst this work is merited, there is some risk. Okay, and just with shaving, I've pretty much got a finish, as you can see. And I'll finish that finish with a sanding stick relatively fine. This looks to be about a 240. Just tickle around the part, blend it in, smooth it out. Like so. Then deburr the corner. Same method with that angled scraping. It's very difficult to do angled scraping on the inside of a curve, so I use the very tip of the blade, and I will literally, at a very shallow angle, I will just cut it to do the same thing. And there it was done. No more sink mark. Lovely, smooth, cast undercarriage leg fork. And that's how I attack things like this. Now sometime later you come to me with all of my parts prepped and some of it assembled. So the turret itself, it goes this way up. This is the bottom. I've put some of it together and I removed the detail. So the Edward, there are also a couple of Edward parts for this. So there's a lap strap for the gunner, a thing to put on top of the seat, which I probably won't bother with. A little piece of detail for this side structure, which is this part here. So when I joined this is actually two parts glued together. When I joined them, I made sure that there was space for that photo etch to fit there without overhanging the strut. So that's ready for the photo etch, but it will need painting first. This piece, this is the sort of handles for the gunner. This was damaged it was damaged on arrival, but not dead. You can see the white there on the edge of the handle, that's where it was bent, so I just put a little bit of liquid cement in there and gently bent it back. If you use too much glue or too much force, you'll snap it clear off and you've got to completely reattach it. So yes, the instructions shows here, you can see the red, and this is the part it pertains to. I'm not sure why Edward would have you cut this part here away. This is a sort of cushiony thing. I, as you can see, have not, because the photographs in the book show that part clear as day, so I'm leaving it there. But yeah, you cut off this little angled section and this raised detail to enable the installation of this part, which is here. However, what the instructions don't show you is that this piece of photo etch is intended to replace the detail on here. So you actually are going, yes, you do need to remove this because it's going to sit there, but you also, if you want to use the photo etch, and I will, need to remove this raised detail as well. Now some may not want to do that because actually the raised detail is quite effective, and being such a dark place, it's all black in there, raised detail is in some respects a little bit easier to pick out. So you do need to just remove this raised detail. This little bezel, I'm taking off the raised dial detail, but I'm going to leave the bezel in situ. The piece of photo etch has a sort of a flap, you can see it better from the back, which allows that area to be bent forward. So I will bend it forward and attach it to this rather than having it just flapping in the breeze. But yes, these little bits of raised detail need to go, and I just trim them off, as you can see, with the tip of a scalpel blade. A little bit disappointing on I think from the point of view of the Edward instructions, that they don't make this clear at all. I'm off shot, brilliant, well done. As with so many things, you kind of need to inch up on this because the detail's quite big. You could ask, why didn't I remove it before I assembled the parts, and the simple answer is that these side frames are already in the way, so it makes no difference. And there we go, that is cleaned up as good as it needs to be. Very long way from perfect, but the etch is going to sit on top of it, so it's fine. I also should point out, I've glued these together, I've sanded the sides down so the joint's minimal, and this part is still movable, so the guns will still move, but the joints along the top of this area are going to be nigh on impossible to fully remove because of the necessity of the minimal glue used to enable that central pivoting sort of gun mount. So I've just sort of sanded across to get it flush. And then from there on it's a full-on case of Nelson's best telescope. So this piece attaches here, and now that it's prepped for the photo etch, it can actually be glued in. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do with this photo etch, because it doesn't fit over that bezel, and I would really rather that bezel stayed. So I'm going to chop the bezel out. Like so. And then that piece can just sit in there like that, and the actual instrument part can glue onto there, and I will put that on after this area is painted. But before I get there, I need to talk about the guns. So here they are. First of all, the kit part. Yes, I have cleaned it up. There was quite a lot of cleanup required, especially around these curved areas, and this is what you get in the kit. It's not that there's still a spruced up on the end. It's not terrible. This is what you get after the master barrels are fitted. There simply isn't any comparison. It just looks so much better. The finesse is off the charts, and you do have fully hollowed out ends. Really, really beautiful. And these sort of muzzle brake things, or whatever they are, they've got the strakes. They're beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So I'm going to show you how to fit those. If you consult the instructions that you get, and this is all you get, when you buy the master set. Obviously it's all you need. There's the pictorial representation of what needs to happen. Obviously cut off the plastic gun barrel and then glue, don't glue anything, drill a 0.8mm hole into the remnant and then insert the new barrel. So I'm going to quickly show you how to go about doing that. It does require a little bit of bravery. So yeah, when you find your nips, these aren't the ones I was using, I got some more out. Need to cut these plastic barrels off. Don't be too shy about cutting them off where you need them to be cut off, just leave a little. If you look at the kit part, where that taper ends pretty much is where we need to cut off. So, pink. There they go. No need to keep them. I then use the sanding stick across the two pieces like this. And I sand back until I get to the edge of that taper. And I'm just trying to make sure they're both the same basically. Because we don't want wonky gun barrels. And that will leave you with something like this. And you should have a fairly nice circular-ish flat face to work with, and we're going to need to drill that out. I recommend a drill bit set along these lines. It does not have to be this specific set by any means. There are many out there that run along these lines, and they go up in 0.1mm increments. In this case, from 0.1, alarmingly, to 1mm. So what we need is in here a pin vise to utilise them with. Smaller ones are available, but I do like this one. It's this is a Tamiya pin vise. So firstly though, using a pointed implement, a needle or a pointed scriber, you need to, with your skill and judgment, prod the centre, or as close to it as you can realistically get, of this stub to make a mark. Now my needle pushes back up the handle quite readily, so I can't push all that hard, but by wiggling and twisting I'm getting a decent little mark there. And that will give you this. Hopefully you can see the little dots. That is enough to drill from, especially if you're confident. However, to make things easier still, if you take your pointed scalpel, introduce the tip of it into that hole and circle the part around like that, you'll take out a little triangle of plastic, a little cone. And in doing so, you've made your little centre punch significantly deeper, which will make it easier for your drill to start up in there. Now it says to use a 0.8. I would not recommend going straight in with a 0.8, because what these drill bits do, even though we're only drilling into soft plastic, they seem to be quite prone to stretching the plastic as much as they cut it. So I'm starting with a 0.5, and frankly you just have to eyeball it. Get it straight that way, look at it from the top as well, and get it as straight as you can. I'm perfectly well aware that that is a lot more difficult than it sounds, and there may be recourse to some form of a jig if that's what you want. But here we go, there's my 0.5mm hole starting up, and it looks fairly central to me. Certainly good enough for this. And just drill down into that a little way. I regularly remove the drill and clear out the swarf because it seems to help with the... Oh, I've just snapped my drill bit because I dropped my drill. Nice one. Luckily, I've got a whole heap more of them. I actually bought, I think it was 10 sets of these off Amazon a while back. They really weren't expensive either. Let's use this one. I think this is a 0.5. This is. Yes, I got 10 sets of these. I think that was like $5.99 or something silly. So that's why I'm so delightfully unconcerned about snapping that one. Alright, take 2. And I'll do the lower one. It's quite easy to locate in our little divot. Get the hole started. And then make sure we're lined up before we really get into it. And I reckon you get the idea. We only need probably about 2mm depth. There we go. Right, now again, don't hop straight up to 0.8. Go to the next one up in the set, which is obviously a 0.6. And this will be very, very quick because it's removing a tiny amount of material, literally straight in and done. Just like that. Two 0.6mm holes. And guess what we do next? Everybody who said we use a 0.7 Jen, give yourselves a pat on the back. Okay, now, nearly just snapped that one as well, didn't I? Now we test fit. Remember I said that the drill bits seem to stretch the plastic almost as much as they cut it. So it's worth checking. Even though we are nominally not big enough, look, we're in. That hole's not quite deep enough. Nor is that one actually. But as you can see, I've slotted in quite happily and they already look basically straight, so I obviously did a decent job with my eyeballs. I think they may be slightly downwards, but you can see you've got a bit of leeway even now. Even though the hole is only 0.7, there's a little bit of wiggle. So if I come up close, you can see that the shoulder of the come on camera, these people need to see. You can see that the shoulder of the fixing tab peg is still visible, so the hole does need to be a tad deeper, and I'll do that. But then obviously once you've got the holes there and the gun will go all the way in, a little bit of super glue, pop it in, again eyeball it from all the angles, make sure it's straight or as close as you can get it to straight, and then yeah, let it go off, and that is our beautiful, beautiful turned brass master 303 gun barrels. And believe you me, these will lift the look of the finished model dramatically. So with those parts sorted, actually this is the point at which I'm going to paint all of these parts that you see here. I'll fit the photo etch afterwards, like I said. Come on, Pito, get out of there. There we go. And everything you see here needs to be painted black. Oh, we didn't talk about these resin parts, did we? So this is the Barracuda cast wheel set. Prep of these before paint is really, I'm going to show you how hard it is. Remove this flash here. If you really want to, but I'll do it just to show, you can separate these two wheels so you've got access all the way around, and I just animal them like that. And then once you have access, get in there and trim out or remove this web like so. That's just there for casting. These are proper resin cast wheels. This isn't 3D printed malarkey. Just make sure that that surface is acceptable, and that's it. I will remove these from the casting block after they've been painted, because the casting block is a dead useful handle. Always worth a quick confidence check that they actually fit the wheel axles. Those of you who watched the P51 series will know where I'm coming from with that. But because these are Barracuda cast items and they're meant for this kit, they do fit. Which only leaves the tail wheel and the boot scrapers here. So the tail wheel is exactly pretty much the same as the kit part. There is not a great deal more detail on it because it's not a great deal more detail to show. Customary 10-second wait for the camera to catch up, if it ever does. There, look at that. Basically the same. There's a little bit more, there's a little bit of a sort of stub axle effect where the tow bar goes, but you can see that there's no sink marks in the resin one, and if I turn it that way it will immediately go out of focus. There we go. You can also see that there is the appearance of fresh air in there between the tyre and the actual undercarriage leg, which is nice. Both of these parts in practice are going to be quite fragile, so it's a simple case of pay your money and take your choice. If you don't want to use a resin tail wheel, you can upskill the plastic one a little bit with a scriber. If you carefully scribe round and round the tyre like this a bunch of times, just be patient and keep on doing it, and go all the way around the tyre like so. A lot more times than what I've just done here, to be honest, but we can gradually develop at the very least a sort of a scribed line effect around that tyre. Hopefully you can see that. And once you've got that scribe there and you've got it a little bit deeper, it's relatively easy to get in there with your knife and just hollow it out a little bit, just to give a better appearance of separate parts. It's quite easy to do if you don't fancy using a resin tail wheel, and I must admit there is an element of risk with that. It is slightly flexible. And the final parts on here, what I keep calling the boot scrapers. These two semicircular parts. These are represented reasonably well on the plastic parts here. So this is the torque scissor from the undercarriage leg from the kit, and you can see it also has that scraper part affixed to it. I've not fully decided which one I'm going to use at this point. Resin one looks quite a lot bigger. I'll just go through the book and I'll find the here's the picture of the undercarriage, and you can see it there, the wooden coloured part. In fact it is made from wood by the looks of it, and you can see you see why I call it the boot scraper. If you look very carefully you can see that it's got a sort of bristly horsehairy affair on its inner face, and it just, when I saw it, it just reminded me of those bristle brush boot cleaners that you see at the doorways of posh houses that you're supposed to scrub your shoes into before you go into the house. I've never owned one of those houses, or indeed one of those shoe cleaners, but I have seen them, and this does remind me of those, and I'm sure that's exactly what its purpose is, just to clean the tyre off a little bit now and again. No, there's no mention of it in this book. It's labelled as number 20 on this diagram here. Wheel brush. So I don't know if that's operated by a linkage. I can see that it looks as though it moves here. It's certainly pivoted and there's a little actuator under there. It might be that that's operated as the undercarriage is retracted, that will push it onto the tyre, which will both brush it clean and actually bring it to a stop as well. Don't know, I'm speculating on that front, but it's definitely a bristle brush attachment which goes on there. So yeah, the resin ones are substantially more substantial, frankly, than the plastic ones. But using the resin ones is going to mean surgery to this torque link, and then some careful work with some super glue. I'll probably use the resin ones though. There you go. There's a direct comparison. There's quite a big size difference. But anyway, yes, I'm going to paint all these parts black. Nothing special. So now I've got all these parts painted black. There's a little bit of masking to be done because we need to paint a few parts silver. Namely the undercarriage legs, so the lower part of the two main undercarriage legs, the tail wheel fork, and the wheel hubs. Now I can't categorically prove that these parts need to be painted aluminium rather than black. I think it's reasonable, more than reasonable actually, to suggest that a lot of these were black. When the aircraft were painted and repainted black, they painted all of the undercarriage bays, legs, etc. as well. In the black and white photo, it kind of does look like this might not be black. It looks a bit less dark than everything around it. And with the wheels, they're more than likely going to be aluminium, I think. But if you've got a photo that proves one way or the other, obviously go with it. If not, go with whatever you think will look better. And in this case, since I have a completely black aircraft, I think a little bit of something to break up the expanse of blackness might be nice. So for that reason, I am going to paint the lower part of the leg, the tail wheel leg, and the wheel hubs. So I wanted to show you, I've masked these. These were painted LP5 Tamiya lacquer paint, and I've masked them up for some silver. This I will paint silver first, and I'm just going to brush paint the tail wheel tyre. It's easier that way for me. Masking things like these is always a pain, and I'd rather just brush paint it, honestly. And you've seen me before multiple times, I suspect, brush painting tyres, and I more often than not do because it's just quicker, frankly. And I could have these, but I decided to have a look at masking them in the spirit of having masked and painted all of the markings. I thought it might be interesting to look at this. So for my money, what there is of it, I prefer to do it this way round most of the time, probably 9 times out of 10. I'll paint the whole lot black and mask the tyre, and the reason for that is because of the way the tyre and the wheel hub interact. So you can see the tyre dips in just like it would on any wheel and tyre combo. So if I'm masking the hub to paint the tyre black, there's very, very little edge area on that hub for the tape to stick to. If you've got a wheel with a nice wide flat hub area, then that's slightly different, but these are not. So I've turned to the ever useful pre-cut circle masks from High Q Parts. These have come from Premium Hobbies and they are superb. As you can see, they're in small increments. Now I tested and I did one at the biggest size from this set, which is 7.6mm. That was a tad big, so I've done these with 7.4, and I'm just going to show you how I go about it. So I'm obviously using the outside of the circle, and you can see I've cut it. Just one place I've cut through it so that I've got an open circle mask, and I've done that because it makes it a heck of a lot easier to tickle the mask into position nicely all the way around. So start off any old wear, get the mask off the tweezers first and foremost, and what you want to try and do is tuck the mask down into that recess right next to the wheel hub, and because I split it, you can easily just work your way around like so, and I'm just using the tip of the tweezers just to gently burnish it down as I get it into position. Where I want it. See how easy that is just to tease it into place. If it's all one piece, it is much less easy to do this. And in the same vein, if the circle mask is slightly not quite the right perfect size, slitting it in one place, or perhaps two if you wanted, just helps you tease it. There's enough flexibility in the tape just to get that mask fully into position, and it should end up looking something like this. Some painting later, this is what we have. Lovely, neat, pretty much perfect actually, wheel hubs. And here's the actual main undercarriage leg now with the silver bottom half, which just brightens that up nicely. Tail wheel with its tyre all hand painted, and you can see the difference in the colour and the finish actually between hand painting and airbrushing there quite well. So next step then is the oleo, the chrome piece, suspension part here, which needs to be done. Obviously you can paint them with your favourite chrome paint, but what I like to use where possible is this stuff, bare metal foil. I believe there are other similar items on the market, and bear in mind you don't need to get the chrome one. The one I have is, as you can see, matte aluminum. I think this might be made in America. Oh yes, so it is. Matte aluminium colour, which is plenty shiny enough actually, as it happens. So here it is, and this is self-adhesive, so it's a bit easier than using real foil. And I've used the ruler, the straight edge, to create a straight edge over here to work from. And what you need to do, obviously I suppose, using a ruler or your favourite measuring implement, whatever that may be, is figure out how much you actually need. I measured it, it's just a shade under 2mm. So I've got an absolute army of tools at the side of the mat here that you can't see. I will mark, there's 2mm. I'm not even under the camera, am I? Oops. Line it up with the edge of your foil. There's 2mm. I've gone a little under and make a divot in the foil. It should be relatively visible IRL, if not on the camera, and then I just eyeball it. Obviously, if you want to, you can measure it down here as well and cut it like so. Then cut a bit that's going to be long enough. And using your tweezers, take that piece of foil from the sheet, and I'll take this foil out of the way because it's upsetting the camera pretty badly, isn't it? And then it's really just a case of introducing the foil to the undercarriage leg and hoping that they get on well. It doesn't stick like you know what to a blanket, so it will take a bit of mucking about, frankly, to get it started. You need to be very, very polite with it, gentle. It's not very robust, this stuff. Once it's started off, I like to switch to a cocktail stick to burnish it down initially. It helps if you have 19 fingers, honestly, but just get it on, start burnishing, and once it's on, that's it really. You just keep on burnishing your way around and just overlap it. Wherever it ends up that the foil joins itself, it won't be very noticeable, to be honest. So you can just carry on going around. That's going to end up right on the front of the leg, so I think what I'm going to do is just snip it off short, like so. And there we have it. I think you can probably see as well that that's quite shiny now that it's on. And it's quite clearly a different finish than the silver paint it's next to, which is the main thing really. If that isn't shiny enough, if you want more shine than that, then get something metal, preferably shiny chromy type metal. So this is my needle that I use for poking rivets into things, and just using the side of it, burnish around it again through some kind of magic trick. I'm unsure of exactly why this happens, but it just really polishes the metal even more. And voila! Right then, now even though I've added the extra colours and the photo etch parts, what I do still have is a set of unrelentingly very black parts. You see I've got the photo etch installed here, which for some reason is blue, but fine, it makes it more visible. I'll leave it as is. Likewise the piece is installed on here, which for some reason is actually black, but they're still very, very black parts, and the same goes for the undercarriage legs. They do look, there's some stuff going on to see now. I've got the shoe cleaners installed, the boot brushes, but they just need a little bit of interest adding really. You can go too far with this of course, but especially considering I am going for the closed turret, I think a little bit of picking out of highlights and detail is warranted. So what I've done is I've mixed up some grey oil paint here, and to do that I've just gone into my drawer of plenty here and I've taken some Payne's Grey. This is Payne's Grey, Winsor & Newton. I think every modeller should have some Payne's Grey in the arsenal, and this one is just a random lighter colour. It's not white, this is actually cream brown for German yellow, Abteilung 240, and I've mixed these together to form this grey colour, which is somewhat similar in hue to the XF24 that we've been using to highlight the model itself. And I'm going to use this to dry brush these parts. I've put it onto a little piece of card, as you can see. This is a little bit of Edward photo etch packaging, and I'm just, this is my dry brush, it's just any old brush which is comprehensively ruined now through being used for dry brushing. Douse the end of it in this grey, and then I'm wiping it on a bit of clean tissue until it's leaving very little evidence, and then starting on an area that I know isn't going to be seen on the finished model, I'll start applying it to see how it looks, and that's not too bad at all. So then just go around the part and basically just give it a jolly good brushing. And because the colour that I'm using isn't wildly different to the black part, it's not adding that horrible super light edges thing that you get. You know, if I was to use silver or white, it would straight away look absolutely crazy, but I'm not. There we go. And then just periodically you're going to have to refresh the brush. And every time you refresh it, you need to re-scrub it. And just work my way around all the areas, and I try where possible, within reason, to brush the parts sort of in accordance with the way the light falls. So here I'm working top to bottom, as it were. And all we're doing, in all honesty, is adding artificial highlights. On a larger model or with an open turret, the light will do this on its own. It doesn't need any help, but this being a smaller model and a closed canopy, we're just helping it out a bit. And it is quite subtle, it's not sort of super in your face, but I always feel like with dry brushing, if you can look at a part and immediately say to yourself, that has been dry brushed, then I think the dry brushing is too obvious. That's my personal opinion, and you know, as ever, you're perfectly within your rights to completely disagree with me and dry brush the model just however you see fit. But this just does pick out just a little bit, picks out the edges on these detailed parts, and Airfix, to be fair, have done a really good job on this. And there's quite a lot going on in this turret, and it's a real shame that to all intents and purposes it's invisible when fitted together. That's all it is. It just picks the detail out just a little bit, not much, just a little. Like here on the side of these guns I'll do a little, but only on the side, not on the gun barrels. We'll deal with those in a minute. As I say, your model, your choice. If you want to pick your parts out with a more obvious colour, then please go ahead and do that. I'm quite happy with this though. A little bit on the undercarriage legs. Again, it just provides a little bit of visual relief, and yes, that is a deliberate pun, because I mean it in both senses of the word. Instead of this being a sort of flat and inarticulate object, because it's all black, this little touch of this slightly lighter colour just makes the detail a little easier to see, basically. It almost adds to the complexity of the aesthetic, really, I suppose. So that's it, easy as that. So last part then on the turret, apart from assembling it, is the actual gun barrels. So there is this thing, isn't there, where modelers go around painting machine guns in a metallic colour, in a gunmetal, more often than not. And I do think, you know, the majority of the time, do some research clearly, but the majority of the time guns don't actually look like that. Guns are black by and large. Some guns are painted. The guns that I've used in my military career were painted black, so they wouldn't look any different to the surrounding structure at all. But a lot of guns, and particularly gun barrels actually, are sort of they're treated with a sort of a chemical. They're chemically etched into that black colour, which has a sort of bluish hue, and I think it is called in fact bluing. Here is a picture on my phone of a real Browning 303 aircraft machine gun. As you can see, it's from the Imperial War Museum, and as I hope you can equally well see, it's black. It's not some dark metallic grey colour, so I would advise modellers not to paint their guns in dark metallic grey colours because it's not accurate. But what you can do is use pencil lead. Here is some pencil. I have simply taken a pencil and I've drawn on this piece of wet and dry, and that has the, I've done that off camera, well done me. Here we are, I'll do it again. Drawn on a piece, this is a well worn used up bit of wet and dry, but it had the effect of making some pencil lead dust basically. And what I do is, using the Mark 1 digit, get some of that pencil lead dust and then rub it in to my fingertip. I now have dirty fingers, and then I just take my machine guns and I rub them with said dirty fingers, like so. And what this does, it's effectively the same as dry brushing my turret parts. It added a gentle difference in visual texture. So now the detail of the guns is easier to see, and it also gives them that slightly indefinable gunnish look, more so than dry brushing with grey would, because it gives them that sort of metallic sheen effectively. If I get hold of this, I can't tell if that's obvious, but hopefully. Again, it's subtle, but I suppose you could say a key word for me in modelling is is subtle, but it is there, it is visible. As I say, just lifts the detail a little bit. If at first, if you do it and you don't think it's really obvious enough, just get a bit more pencil lead on your fingers and go back over it. It just adds that sort of metallic shine without making your guns into a silly metallic grey colour, which is not accurate. There we go. And then go wash your hands, because otherwise you're going to get this graphite dust all over everything. You don't want it on. Well, here's the completed turret. What a delightful little thing it is. Just assembled as per instructions. The guns do move. I can move them up and down, but they're only glued in with ultra glue, so I just need to let that dry a bit more before I try and actually move them, because I probably want them to be pretty much level. And as predicted, very little really of the detail in there is really visible. You can kind of see it, but it's a really lovely piece of work by Airfix, though, I have to say. There aren't many manufacturers that would have done a better job than this, frankly. I glued the turret glass on with this stuff. I find this utterly pointless as a gloss clear varnish, but it's really good. Sorry, it's really good as a lightweight adhesive, because you can, with things like this transparency and occasionally small pieces of photo etch, things like that, you can hold it in place and use this just like you would liquid cement, but there's zero risk of it damaging anything. If it gets all over stuff and runs out and makes a mess, you can simply wipe it off with a damp cotton bud. So it's dead safe, but it will hold it. I mean, I wouldn't be able to pick the model up by this transparency, but who does things like that? So that's the turret complete, and that can be dropped into the model whenever I'm ready to do so. Well, with the turret done, all that's left here are these small parts you see before you: a pair of wheels and tyres, a pair of exhausts, and still the undercarriage legs. So what is left? Well, first of all, I suppose I should explain how I've got to where you see the parts already. I could do all of this step by step, but it would just take a really, really long time, so I'm just going to explain it. There isn't anything I've done that I haven't shown you before, either in these videos or others before them, so if you do have any issues or questions with anything I'm about to say, just drop me a comment down below, and I will answer you. Right then. So the towel wheel is where you've already seen it up to. The only thing I've done to that since you saw it last is I have used black wash, that being this Tamiya panel line accent colour, to just neaten up the delineation around the actual strut and the tyre, and obviously the wheel itself. The wheels and tyres, I have used the XF24 in the airbrush, very, very thin mixture of, and just very, very lightly dusted around the outside of the tyre. And I've done this to make it, to bring some shape into it. You can probably see how it's darker around the hub and then a little bit lighter towards the edge. That's what I've done there, and certainly if I hold it next to this unmolested tyre, you can see there's a big difference in the colour. Once I had done that, both sides, I didn't mess with the tread area, that is still black. I've used the black wash again, just around the hub. Let it run around the hub and just sit in there just to deepen that demarcation. That's where those are at. The undercarriage legs you've seen every step. The exhaust stubs were painted XF85 along with everything else, you may recall. I then sprayed them with this. This is Mr. Metal Colour Stainless, and this is the stainless shade. That's how it looks in the jar. And I've sprayed it on. You can brush paint this on really, really easily. It's really excellent for brushing actually, but because I'd already painted them black, I used the airbrush because this will tend to wipe that black back off. So I painted with that, and then on top of that I did a black wash. I just painted the black wash on the whole thing and didn't really rub it off, and then on top of that I used the brown, and that has ended up with what you see here, which is a pretty decent looking exhaust stub, I think, already. But there's more to come on those, so I'll put these back in the drawer. And the first thing we're going to do to continue these parts is add a little bit of wash to the wheel hubs, the undercarriage legs, and indeed a little bit on the tyre wheel. And for that I'm going to use this stuff, Oil Brusher Starship Bay Sludge. This colour is available in already pre-made wash form, and you can probably get it in many other forms if I know ammo, but I'm just going to use a little bit from this oil brusher. Whoop. And it's a sort of a deep greenish brown. It's just a good old manky wash colour really. So just blob some of that oil brusher into a palette. I ought to get some palettes that aren't white, I suppose, because they just send the camera doolally, don't they? And to that you need to add some thinner. Use the thinner of your choice. Odorless enamel thinner. Use enamel thinner basically. If you don't have enamel thinner you can use terps, but enamel thinner is where it's at. Got a little squeezer. Just a couple of drops and we'll mix it up and just see how it looks. See, it's like a deep olive drab sort of colour when you mix it out like this. A little bit more thinner than that. So for those of you that like recipes, that's 4 drops of thinners to 1 brush full of oil, sorry. Get rid of the pipette and put the lid back on the thinners. Okay, and I'm just going to pop a little bit of this wash into the areas that want it on these legs. So that's this sort of bolty looking detail down here. And just around the bottom of the oleo itself. There we go. And I'm going to do the same thing. Oh, I forgot to mention I also put black wash into the central ring there. But only the central one. I'm going to use this wash on the rest of it. I don't want loads, I don't want it to not be silver anymore. All I want to do is provide a little shadow for these details. And really don't worry if it gets on the tyre, those are going to get dirtied up as well. There we go. I can come closer, but I don't know if it's going to stay in focus. Kind of just touching there. There we go. See how it immediately just provides a lining effect for all the detail. And finally, the tail wheel. Be careful when using tweezers like this, it's ever so easy to twang your part off into last week and never find it again. The reason I'm applying this wholesale across the entire leg is I just want a very thin layer, is just to essentially just dull that finish down a tad. There we go, that's the wash applied to those parts. Leave this in the palette, it'll keep for a while, probably a day or so, and we may well want to come back to it at some point. So those need to dry, so while they're drying we'll switch our focus to the exhaust and do some concurrent activities. So the next thing to do then with the exhaust is apply the grime, which you can no longer see it's called grime because it's covered up its own label. This is the mixture, it's roughly, and I say roughly, 50-50, 1-to-1 of XF64 red brown and black, and it just comes out in this really stuck lid. Deep sort of brownish hue, and that is it's masterful for exhaust stains. Exhaust stains and general grime it's absolutely perfect for. And what we're going to do is put a little of it onto these exhaust stubs. There's a lot of thinner in here as well. So you've got your red, brown, your black, and obviously you can vary it. You can make it a bit blacker than this if you want. It has been at some point, as you can see by the staining. I should probably use a new jar, right? But it's perfect for exhaust stains, so that is effectively what we're going to use it for today, because exhaust stubs have exhaust staining too. So a little in the airbrush, I'm using the Posh airbrush, so there's a little bit of finesse about the job. I've got black paint on my thumbnail, I'll have to live with that. And all I'm going to do is just carefully and gently pop a little bit of this across this surface. It's going to darken the finish down a touch, it's going to dull the finish down a touch. And it will give a really nice base for some pigment effects to be added onto. On the second and third stub I've added a little bit more to simulate where the exhaust flows back from each stub. The front one is cleaner. Now if I show you these two together, again as usual this is quite a subtle effect, but I think you can straight away see the difference. It's just dulled it down Still a bit of shine there, which is fine. Just dulled it back and darkened it off just a touch. It works hand in hand with the products that are already on there. For a quite convincing surface, and again leave that in the airbrush for a minute because we are going to use it on the tyres once we've got this wash cleared out of the way. Now if you wanted to, you could mix a more tan or greyish tan version and spray that, because if you look at a real in-use exhaust stub, you'll find that there's lots and lots of different colours on there, going right up to almost white. So you've got sort of dark black looking stains, and you've got kind of white exhausty sort of stuff, some sort of heat staining sometimes as well, you know, in the bluish and purplish zones. These exhausts realistically are a little bit too small to be getting into that. Excuse my phone. So you could mix a sort of a tan, a brighter tan colour to add a little bit of that, but I tend to do that in fact with these, or any other pigment actually, but these are pretty good for it. This set in particular, the sand and mud colour, are what I tend to use. You'll note that there is a new applicator in here. This is a Temu special. A pack of a lot, I think 30 pieces there were originally. They're nowhere near as hard wearing as the Tamiya originals, but they also cost probably about 79p. So, you know, the old phrase, you pay your money and take your choice, they will do. So, a little bit of the colour. Rub it on there. And then just tap and dab it onto your stubs, wherever you think it needs to go. And then some of this brighter, excuse my phone again, this brighter finish as well. And I find this Tamiya stuff to be quite unlike other pigments, and it does actually sort of stick. There's a slight waxiness about it. Once you've got it on there, you can use a brush and kind of just give it a little polish, and it blends it in a little bit, brings it all together, and that is my exhaust stub. It's really quite convincing, I feel. To finish that off, we'll use a bit of soot black, but we'll do that in a moment. Alright, back with it, sorry about that. So, mud. And then sand. A little bit of blendy blend. So this is giving us a nice kind of depth of colours and shades, and using the sand last has also sort of just picked out the weld detail a little bit, or the detail on the exhaust stubs. So that's Weathering Master Set A. And then with Weathering Master Set B, we can go in with yet more shades. So we've got Rust, and soot and snow, and believe it or not, all three of these are useful here. So we'll start out with a bit of rust, and this will bring some of that brown, bright brown back into things. Probably doesn't look like I'm using any rhyme or reason, but I sort of am. And as I've said a trillion times already, these are quite subtle effects. It's one of those where when you initially view the model you just think, oh, exhaust stubs. It's only when you look really closely and think, hang on, that really actually looks like an exhaust stub, you know. So, black then, or soot, which you might figure, and we dab that round to the end. There we go, and finally white. Like I said, you do see these real bright deposits sometimes, but you can just use this to really pick out the detail again. And there we go, I am happy with that. It might seem like an extraordinary amount of effort to go to for such a tiny part of the model, but it's things like that, to be honest, that just make the difference visually on a really good model, where you put the same amount of effort into every part of it. Here is the finished stub. There's lots of variation there, there's lots of depth there, and it, for my money, does look quite convincing. And by now this wash should be dry enough for government work. This tail wheel fork I'm not really going to do anything with, I'm just going to touch it up with my dirty fingers, and that'll just blend out any sort of pools of wash, and all I've done is just dulled the finish down a little. The legs, let me get a cotton bud, and I'm moistening it with turpentine, not with enamel thinner, turpentine. Turpentine is a little bit less severe, and I've taken almost all of that back out again. It's just literally just moistened, not what you'd call wet, because if you go in with a very wet cotton bud you will just wipe it all straight back off. And all I want to do is just leave a little bit, I don't want a lot on it honestly, it's a little bit in those recesses. Very gentle, very light touch, just tickling the excess wash back off that surface there. You can see, because it hasn't had that long to dry, it is coming off very, very easily. The longer you leave the wash in situ, the longer you leave it to dry, the more difficult it is to remove it. but it is always at least somewhat easy to remove. So that's that. And then the wheel hubs, again, just a little wipe. You can see how it reactivates that wash a little bit, and then you can sort of manipulate it, move it around. You can leave it in some areas and completely remove it in others, and you can get some lovely subtle grimy effects with it. Those of you who are into drinking games whilst watching modelling YouTube videos could perhaps use the word subtle for this video. Okay, that's that tickled off. Now we're going to get the tyre dirty. So for this I'm going to use some sponge. Now I've got an old model kit box full of bits of sponge, and these have all come out of packaging from aftermarket parts or suitable household purchases. There's probably enough sponge in here for approximately 16 lifetimes, because you tend to use it in huge pieces like this. So a little piece of sponge. This is a relatively large cell size, and now I'm going to piggle it a little bit because the perfect cube of sponge does not make a good random applicator at all. So just nibble at it a little bit to provide a much less regular surface. And you can use this method in many ways in modelling. It's often used for chipping as well, applying chips. So I've now got a little piece of weeded out sponge that I can hold in my tweezers, and it should be able to provide a reasonably random pattern. And today every single jar of paint is just stuck solid because everything's so warm at the minute. I don't know. Flat earth or a similar muddish sort of hue, muddish, dirtish. There's probably enough paint, as there is in this case, just hanging about in the lid for our purposes right now. As you can see, I've just mixed that up with a gash paintbrush. Pop that out the side where you can't knock it into anything. So gather together your piece of sponge with the tweezers to make a nice little applicator like so. And dab it into the colour. So there's colour on the sponge, and then decolour it a little bit, and then come back in onto your tyre and apply. And initially you won't see much happening, but as we go forward, or continue to do it I should say, more patterning will start to apply itself onto this tyre. I'm doing this because these aircraft operated from grass airfields, relatively few hard runways, you know, relative to the amount of airfields that were operating at that time. For sure there were airfields with hard runways, don't get me wrong, definitely, but relatively few. So tyres got dirty. I'd imagine that the aircraft wash regime wasn't really strictly adhered to either. And effectively I've just added sort of muddish coloured spatteriness onto this tyre. It's quite randomish. And some of the marks are much paler and sort of less well defined than others. It's the nature of the beast. Because the paint does very quickly dry on the sponge, and then it doesn't really transfer and you almost get like a ghost effect. It's quite small. If you wanted to, you could elect to dry brush the lettering on these a little bit, pop that out as well. Now, using a sort of Ammo AK Vallejo style acrylics may net some slightly more consistent results than using Tamiya because they dry a lot more slowly. And also every now and again just go back to your sponge and pull the surface off again because the paint will dry onto it and it just starts to clag it up. There we go. You can also, if you wish, jump onto your undercarriage doors with a little bit of this as well. Just a touch, not a lot. Inside and out, remember. Mud is not choosy about where it lands. There we go. Right. Now I'm going to grab my airbrush that's still got that grime mix in it. Turn the compressor back on. And I'm just going to very, very gently spray this muck mix onto my tyre. And that has the effect of sort of unifying and blending those sort of dirt chips a little bit. And the last step in that, then we're going to go back to these weathering masters. And use those. As before, give it all a blend with a soft brush. And that's what you end up with. As usual, and again, it's nothing very in your face here, but it's very definitely at the same time, it's very clearly not just a black painted tyre. There's a lot more going on, so that if you then look more closely you can see that. None of this should really be visible from yards away, you know, but in reality the aesthetic of it will be visible from some distance, but you just won't really necessarily say why. That makes sense. And don't forget to visit the tire wheel and show it some love as well. So there we have it then, a veritable smorgasbord of different techniques and similar techniques used in different ways to pretty up all these small parts and bring them up to the level of the rest of the model. Something that I think is quite important, because if you paint a canopy separately to a model, or if you paint an aerial separately to the model, or any other small parts that are added on without any sort of extra juice, it really is obvious a lot of the time. If you can bring yourself to be patient enough to treat each of these small parts like a whole other model in its own right, the difference in the finished product can be quite dramatic. But I think I've yabbered on for long enough in this one. I'm going to call it there. That will be the end of this episode, and I think it's very likely that the next episode may well see this model wrapped up. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've gotten something from it, and I look forward to seeing you next time. And with all of that said, I think it only remains for me to say until next time, look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out.